Welcome to the Motocross Vault! Let it go!
Hello, this is Tony Blazer, back with another video for the Motocross Vault. And what this one's going to cover is the second installment of my kind of bike review series, where I went back and looked at all the machines I've owned over the years. Last week I released the first installment. That one covered the 125s. I had, if I remember right, 8 of those. I've had significantly more 250s. I think at last count it's 16 250s I've had over the years. I kind of jump back and forth. I get 125s and I'll decide I want a 250, and I even get a 500 sometimes. Over the many years I've been riding, I kind of like switching it up. And a lot of times I've had many bikes at the same time. At one point I had 125, 250, and 500 a couple of times. So I like jumping back and forth. And like I said, I typically don't keep my bikes for a long time. I'll keep them maybe a year, sometimes less. It depends on how much I like them or not. So some of these bikes I had a long time. Some of them I had not very long. Some I liked a lot, some I hated. So I'll get into that here in the video. So unlike the other videos, if you've seen some of my other bike reviews, these are not going to be a real in-depth thing. I'm not going to talk about the size of the suspension, diameter of the forks or any of that stuff. This is just really my recollections, my thoughts, my feelings, the things I remember about the bike, the things I remember liking, disliking about them. As I said in the first video I did, I get a lot of people asking me, is this bike good, that bike good, or whatever, and they're looking at buying some of the old bikes. So these are going to be based not on the magazine reviews, just my personal experience with the machines. I've had a lot of them. Love motorcycles still to this day. Like to have more all the time. So this is going to be, I don't know, probably not a real long video. I wouldn't think. I'm going to not get into too much in depth on any one, but hopefully you'll enjoy it, get a little something out of it. So this is a look back at the 250 machines that I've owned over the years. My first 250 machine is the 1978 Honda CR250R Elsinore. Alright, first up on my look back at the 250 machines is the first real motocross bike I ever owned, the 1978 CR250R Elsinore. I bought this motorcycle for $250. I still have the little index card I got from, I think it was at the local dealership here in Leesburg, Virginia, which was Hall's Honda back then. Saw it on the bulletin board back in the days before, before you could go on the internet or anything. You used to get the Cycle Trader or the One Ad Weekly or something, or, bulletin boards. Go to your post office, your local bike shop. Somebody stuck a little postcard on there. I wanted it. I snagged the postcard. I didn't write it down. I kept the postcard. Like I said, I still have it, so nobody else could get this bike. I went out, got it for $250. It was a pretty cool machine. Like, it was mind-blowing for me at the time. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, had several CRs. I never had anything like that. My parents were definitely against motocross bikes and stuff. They weren't in for the two-wheelers. So I had a foofy little bike. I had a Trail 90, one of these step-through 90s, if you're familiar with them. That was the first motorcycle I had that was, a full-size, anything that you would consider a real motorcycle. I had it, it's hard to remember now, maybe for a year or so, 2 years. It was pretty old. It's like a 72, 73. It's pretty old when I had it. And then the same guy had the CR, Joey. He ends up jumping it and breaking all the electricals, which were inside like a welded section in the middle. So anyway, killed my poor 90. So I said, screw it, I'm going to get a bike. So I went and got a CR250. This bike taught me all about what real motorcycles are like. It was the first motorcycle I had with a clutch. Super high performance for the time. Like I said, I had ridden, he at the time maybe had an 81 CR. This is like 86 era, I think, about 1986 when I got it. And this was a really, really awesome machine at the time. Really, I just rode it up at my parents' place. We had, some trails through the woods and a big long. I lived in the middle in the woods for starters. It wasn't like I was living in the city then. So there was a lot of places to ride. Like as far as trails go, there were trails all through the woods we had, and it was mainly up and down like my driveway, which was probably, I don't know, half a mile long. It's pretty long. So like I said, we were way back in the woods. So there was still some fun to be had. I did not get to ride it on a motocross track. I never ever had that bike on a motocross track the whole time I had it. It was just for trail riding and playing around. I didn't know how to do jumps. Didn't know how to do that stuff really. But it taught me how to use the clutch. How to keep from killing myself on a very potent machine. Now things I do remember about this bike, it was really fast. So much faster than anything I'd ridden before. I honestly think it was faster than in his 81. It was a really potent machine. 78 was a great year for the CR. That's why so many people still race them now. It was a really powerful machine. And coming from such a like a turd of a machine to this thing, I was like, whoa, I got to be very careful not to kill myself. But the bike was awesome for that. Suspension stuff, I can't speak to that. I mean, like I said, at my speed and my knowledge, it worked okay. I wasn't hitting any big doubles or anything on it. In fact, I ended up buying a spare one after I had some problems with it. And that spare one had like Fox air shocks on it, which, holy crap, I wish I had them now. They're probably worth a fortune. But I stuck them on there. I had no idea how these damn things work. They were completely out of whack, and I had no idea how to tune them. It was worse. I ended up putting them the stock shock. I actually think he might have had worse performance shocks on there. They weren't, when I got the bike, it didn't have the OEM shocks. Had some aftermarket ones, but I'm not sure what brand they were on there. I ended up, there was nothing I knew how to do. I wasn't going to tune the suspension or anything. It was just ride it, put gas in it. Probably Kmart 2-stroke oil at the time. It was nothing fancy, but I love this machine. Like I said, it's one of my favorites I ever had just because it was the first real bike I learned to ride on. So great machine. And damn it, I wish I still had it. 250 number 2 is the 1985 Yamaha YZ250. The next 250 I owned was a 1985 Yamaha YZ250. Now, between the 78 CR and this 85 YZ, I had a couple of 125s. I had an 87 KX125, and I had an 88 YZ125 that I covered in another video. But after riding those, I decided, hey, I want to get another 250 here. So even though it was a couple years older, I found a really clean 85 YZ250. I think it was over in Baltimore when my buddy and I, Jamie, went to go get it. I think I paid about $1,000 for it, if I remember right. But this is like 88 or so, I think. Maybe it was a couple years old, but it was really clean. And this bike was really powerful. That's the one thing I remember about it. Two things I really take away from this bike. Fantastic motor. The motor was incredibly torquey. If you ever had one of these 85 YZ250s, they were monster engines. I remember Rick Johnson and those guys were running basically stock bikes that year. They, production bikes, and that bike was as fast stock as many of the other modified bikes were. It was a romping, stomping engine. You could ride it around all day without actually getting up on the pipe. It just had so much torque. Phenomenal engine. The rest of the bike, though, is crap. The ergonomics, I thought, again, coming off like an 87 and 88 125 with the more modern kind of, wasn't really low boy yet, but much lower, slimmer slimmer ergonomics. The 85 had a really pudgy tank. You kind of had a banana seat and you sat up in it. So it felt really wide. It was real hard to get forward. It had more of that old school ergonomic feel where the newer bikes, the 87s and newer, were getting into all the tank seats and all these other things to make the bike a little more slim. So jumping back, even though it was only 3 years you're talking about, pretty big difference in the feel of the bike. You also went from disc brakes, which I had gotten used to at this point, back to a drum brake, which sucked. The motor, again, was the highlight. The rest of the bike, it didn't handle very well. The handling was really compromised by the suspension. Again, at this point, I had gotten into motocross a little bit. I was still a novice riding C-Class, but I knew enough that I had figured out how to jump and things like that. And the stock suspension on this bike was just terrible. The forks were like marshmallow soft. I remember putting like air in the forks. In the old days, they had Schrader valves on them, and you would actually add air to the fork. It had a spring in there, but the air was like an assist to stiffen it up. And I had to run air in it to prevent it from bottoming over everything. And the rear shock had this nasty habit of kicking. They used to call it Yamaha hop. And if you hit a square edge bump, it would just kick and send you a flying W. I almost went over the bars a couple of times. One time hit so hard, and I did that whole thing like you'd see in dirt bike crash and burn, where your legs are up over your head and you're hanging on by the handlebars. Thing just tried to kill me on several occasions. So the combination of my mediocre skill level, the really powerful engine, the terrible suspension, and the wayward handling, not a great combination. I remember when Dirt Bike tested the thing, they described the handling of this bike as like a school bus with 4 flat tires, and that's how I would have described it. At this point, we had a cool little track in Point Rocks, Maryland. It was super whooped out and rough, and holy Christ, this bike was just a handful. It scared the crap out of me many occasions. So I think I only had it maybe 6 months, or maybe not even a year. I really didn't like this bike. Like I said, it was going back a couple of years back then was such a difference. Now, again, I mean, you look at a KX250. If you look at a 12 and you look at a 17, you almost can't tell the difference. They look the same. There's not much difference. I'm sure little subtle things, but not in the old days, in the 80s, you went back 3 years, you're like, holy crap, that's like a total generation change. So I think that was probably a mistake on my part. Even though the engine was plenty powerful, the rest of the bike was way lacking. My third 250 motocross machine, the 1988 Yamaha YZ250. After I got tired of fighting with that 85, I decided I did want to get something a little newer, a little more modern. So I picked up a 1988 YZ250. Now the bike was maybe a year old at that point. It's probably like 1989 or so. That was a hugely improved bike over the 85. It was the first year for the new YZM look bodywork, complete redesign Yamaha did that year, and a big improvement, especially the layout. Like I said, the 85 tank was very fat, pushed you back, couldn't get up over the front. It hurt the handling because you couldn't weight the front end. The 88 had a very low boy, sleek layout. You could slide all the way forward on it. Disc brakes, big improvement. Cartridge forks, holy crap, the suspension was better. Big improvement. This was a really cool looking motorcycle, and I quite liked it. But eventually what happened was my buddy Jamie Connor, again, my best pal, he ends up picking up a 1989 YZ125, and we were riding together all the time. And of course, we always swapped bikes back and forth. And after, I don't know, I probably had the bike 3-4 months or whatever, we were swapping back and forth. I finally decided, I liked his 125 better. I felt more comfortable on it. After being on 125s for quite a while and then switching back to 250s, he got on my 250 and loved it. So we made an even swap. We decided, I like your bike better. You like mine. Let's just trade. So we ended up trading. I gave him that YZ250 straight up for the 89 YZ125. So I got to ride it still a little bit. It was a pretty cool deal because we could still trade off. But I think I was just happier with the 125 at the time. My fourth 250, the 1989 Kawasaki KX250. After we made the trade, I had that YZ125 maybe about a year, and I ended up having a problem with where I ended up roaching the cylinder let go, and then I tried to get it replaced because I didn't have the money for a new cylinder back then. It was probably $250, which I'm in college at this point. It's like 1990, 89 era. I didn't have any money. I was flat broke, and I tried to get the cylinder fixed. I've sent it out to one of these sleeving places. They put a iron sleeve in it, but then I don't think they got the ports quite right. So that YZ125 never ran right after that. I was like, okay, time to let the YZ125 go. So I ditched that, and I went to my buddy Ted Orr at JT Motorsports in Frederick, Maryland, and they had an 89 KX250 on the showroom floor. It was a used bike. Turns out it was a pretty beat bike. I ended up buying that for what I got out of my YZ. I never felt comfortable in this bike. Now, if you look at the test, what the magazine said, this was a really good machine, but it reminded me a hell of a lot of that 85 YZ. It was very pudgy. Basically, the KX500 layout, if you get on modern is a wrong word, but the last generation of KX500s, they have that really pudgy tank, and it just felt big and heavy to me. Now, the forks were good this year, but I didn't jive with the bike. I didn't like the way the motor ran. A buddy of mine had the 88 version of KX250, and it was a monsterly powerful engine. Holy Christ, that thing it was actually a lot like my 85. It was really powerful with better suspension, basically. And I know a lot of people, like my buddy Mike Sweeney had an 89. He loved it. I didn't like this bike. I had it about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, not even. Very short time. I just never could feel comfortable with it. So it was here and gone pretty much right away. The next bike on my list, the 1990 Honda CR250R. After I got rid of the KX250, I ended up picking up a 1990 CR125, a bike that I ended up really loving. A great machine, and I loved it so much I picked up a CR250 as well. So I had a 1990 CR250, one of my favorite all-time motorcycles. This bike, I love the ergonomics of it. Super slim layout, great. It's funny, I just restored one 3 years ago now. And I went and I had a brand new KTM at the time in 2016, and that 1990 CR is thinner. It's slimmer. The ergonomics, I think, to me at least, I thought they were actually better. It has a really narrow layout. This first generation of the low boy tank look and stuff with the Honda, they were razor thin through the middle and just really nicely put together motorcycles. Now, had a great engine. That HPP engine, the Honda PowerPort motor, was phenomenal. It had a super wide power band for its day. Even riding it now, it's still pretty strong. It's not powerful compared to a modern 250 today, but at the time in 1990, it was a romp'em stomp'em engine. It was a great engine, really wide, electric. There was not a lot of hit. The 89 had a really powerful hit. The 90 has a much smoother transition. It just pulls and pulls and pulls. The thing I liked about that was, I had a couple of races where I'd crash, and I remember one time I crashed and broke the clutch lever off, had no clutch, and that thing, man, you could just leave it in a gear. You didn't have to worry about shifting it. It would just ring it out, and it would just never stop pulling. Incredibly wide power band. I remember listening to Guy Cooper talk about his Honda, how he could do all the triples in first gear on his Honda. When he went to Suzuki, he had to figure out he had to shift a lot more and stuff. It's because that Honda engine just never stopped pulling. It was just so awesome. What was not great about the bike Head shake was a brutal. These things, all those late 80s, early 90s Hondas had a really nasty head shake. So if you got tired, towards the end of the moto and you weren't, your arms were letting go, it was really easy to have the bars ripped out of your hands. So you had to be cognizant of that. The old trick we'd use was you would cinch the crap out of the triple clamp bolt and pinch that thing down till you felt a little bit of drag. So it was not good for the life of your bearings, but it was like a poor man's steering stabilizer. So I'd crank the crap out of that thing. So you'd feel that little bit of drag, but it would slow that oscillation a little bit. The suspension was not great either. Really, the forks and the shock, neither one was good. But the forks in particular were really bad in these 90s. They had a problem with the early, Shaw upside down stuff had particulate contamination issues where it would, when you got them serviced, I had mine revalved by Bump Sticks over in Maryland, and they worked really well at first. But within, a couple of weeks, they were back to being trash again. What would happen was, as the sliders were going in there, they were actually, rubbing off all these little metal flakes that would get in the damping. They didn't have that kind of hard coating on them like modern forks do, and it just would leave all this particulate crap in there, just like, dirty oil in your car when it's ready to be changed. It was full of crap. I remember when you change out the oil, and it was just tons of gold little shavings in there and stuff, and it would just clog up the internals. So it was one of those things where the bike required constant maintenance to keep the suspension working. And again, I'm broke. At the time, I'm going to school full time. I'm working at a bank. I'm making like, $6 an hour or $7 an hour, whatever the hell it was back then. And I was just flat broke. So I didn't have money to, the racing thing was always a hobby. I was never going to go pro. So keeping the bike maintenance-wise, the suspension was always a nightmare. But the machine itself was excellent. I had some great results on this bike. I had basically all the trophies I own still to this day, except for a couple are from this bike, the 1990 125 and 250. Won my first race on this bike. Great machine. Loved it to death. I had it maybe 2 years, which at the time was a really long time for me, 2 or 3 years maybe anyways. It was one of the bikes I had the longest. I really loved it. Great machine. And like I said, I liked it well enough that I bought another one a couple years just back to restore. Next up, the 1995 Suzuki RM250. Now, as I said, I had that CR250 quite a while. It was a great machine. Really, the only reason I got rid of it was it just started to get tired. Again, I didn't have the money to do a complete rebuild on it. I could feel the crank was getting a little bit wonky. Same thing with the 125. I had both of those bikes for a couple of years, and I just decided to get rid of them because they were just getting tired. I cracked the wheel 2 or 3 times. I raced a lot on that thing, rode it a lot, pretty much rode it into the ground. And when it started to give up the ghost, I didn't have the money to do a complete rebuild for it. So I ended up selling it, and I went back to my buddy JT Motorsports, Ted Orr, and picked up a 1995 RM250. Now, this was a bike, another one that I absolutely hated. It was so different after that CR. I kind of had the same thing Guy Cooper had, where the CR, it literally didn't care what gear you were in. You could be in third, you'd be in fourth. It would pull from the 0 RPMs and then rev to the moon. You didn't care. This RM was the complete opposite. It had no response it was a case reed engine. It like kind of bogged, and then it hit like a ton of bricks in the middle, and it was just a death machine. I hated the way it handled. The bike felt super busy and sketch all the time, where the CR would head shake. Like the CR would head shake under deceleration. You'd be coming down a hill and then into some braking bumps, and if you were not holding on tight or you weren't in the right body position, it would get oscillation. The RM was opposite of that. It didn't really head shake under decel. It was more like it would actually head shake under acceleration, and it just felt loosey-goosey, like it's kind of just dancing all over the place. Even on paper, I think the suspension had the twin shaper forks and stuff, so the suspension was better. That part wasn't too bad, but the best way I'd describe those things, I always felt like it had a hinge in the middle. Like the front wheel was doing something that the rest of the bike wasn't, and I just never felt comfortable on it. It had that, those mid-90s RMs too had like a really fat midsection. They actually put extra plastic over the airbox and stuff to make them thicker. And the theory with that was to give you a little more to hang on to, which I get it, that's fine, but it felt very porky to me after the CR. It even sounded, I remember making fun of the sound. It was like, my CR was like, brup, brup, and this thing was like, bring, and I didn't like it. It was a hunk of crap. I hated this motorcycle. So I got rid of that one as quick as I could. Definitely, RIP 1995 RM250. Next up, the 1995 Yamaha YZ250. After I said good riddance to the unloved RM250, I picked up a machine I liked 1,000% better. I ended up getting a 1995 YZ250. Now, this was a great machine. Motocross Action picked it as the best bike that year. It was definitely maybe not as sexy as the CR at the time, although the 95 CR was purple and it was weird. I thought that was strange, but I did like the looks of this YZ. I love the graphics that year, even though they're like lavender. It's kind of a strange thing. In general, I think some of the 90s stuff's maybe a little bit much, but for some reason, this 95 appealed to me. It still does. I still love this bike. It was a really, really good machine. It had, again, I don't think the motor was as good as the 90. That HPP motor, that CR, was just unbeatable. That's why they raved about it so much. It was a motor of doom. It was phenomenal. Now, the YZ did have a much more CR-like power band from low to mid. It was really strong roll-on power. You could whack the throttle and just burp and pulled right through. Super smooth, hooked up excellent on almost anything. Very electric like the CR was. Didn't have that like shallow low end and then hard hit like the RM did. It didn't pull on top nearly as far. It kind of laid down on top. It didn't have that screaming high RPM rev that the CR had, but overall I like this motor a lot. Handling was pretty good. I still think the CR turned a little better, but it was certainly way more stable. The suspension was very good on this bike. I liked it. Really, the only thing that I kind of had a beef with was that, at least for me, without putting race gas in it, it pinged. It had like a knock to it. If you rode it in really heavy sand, like at Budds Creek or someplace where you get out there and the sand's deep, it's wet, the bike would, ping pretty bad if you didn't have race gas in it. So I usually ran like a little bit of a 50-50 mix or something to put in there to stop that. But the bike itself was excellent. Love this bike. Good machine. Another machine that I would love to have today. I wish I still had it. If I'd pick up one now, I definitely would. It's a great bike. If you're looking for a bike to restore or ride or whatever, you can't go wrong with a 95 YZ. Next up, the 1996 Suzuki RM250. In 1996, I got hit with the new bike bug big time when Suzuki came out with their all-new RM lineup. The RM125 and RM250 were completely new in 1996, and I just thought they were gorgeous. I thought they were just beautiful. I still do. I think it's a great machine. Maybe one of my all-time favorite Suzuki designs. Really cool bikes. I could not afford the 250 initially. I was really on the fence, about getting the 125. I'd had always used bikes. Like I said, the last new bike I owned, embarrassingly, was a 87 Honda Fat Cat I bought brand new. Other than that, every other bike I'd ever owned, ATVs, bikes, anything, had always been used. It allowed me to get them cheap, and you turn them basically for whatever you almost never lost money. You ride them for a year and get out of it without getting hurt too bad. So I just wanted, for whatever reason, I was obsessed with this new 96 Suzuki. So I ended up going and getting a brand new 96 RM125, brand new off the showroom floor. Still the best suspension, I think, of any bike I've owned. Phenomenal forks. Those right side up forks get a bad rap, and that's total BS. If you aren't Jeremy McGrath, they were phenomenal. So I love that part of it, but I had been riding 250s for, 3 or 4 years at this point, and I had a hard time going back to the 125, and particularly this 125 because it had a very narrow power band. It wasn't like that RM250 where it was like all mid only. It had a little bit of low end grunt. For 125, it was actually very responsive, but the mid range was where most of the power was, and there was just no top end pull at all. It just kind of hit hard and then kind of laid down. I always felt like I was in the wrong gear on it. I had a hard time, and I didn't have the money to get hop-ups. Maybe if I'd put a pipe on it and some other stuff, I would have been a little more comfortable on the bike. But in general, the 125s I'd had at this point, the 90 CR 125 I'd had been like a rev rocket, just pin it. Buddy of mine had a 94 CR 125. I've ridden that a lot. Great bike, again, just pin it. And this RM was kind of like if you pin it, it just kind of hit a wall if you tried to scream it. So I like the bike in a lot of ways, but I ended up not feeling real comfortable with it. I raced it for maybe half a year. I don't know, I probably had 6 months or so, and I said, you know what? I think I'm better suited to a 250. Again, I'm always going back and forth. So I ended up selling the 125, and I picked up a used 96 RM250. Now, this bike, again, is one of these machines that gets a terrible rap, but I think that's because of McGrath. As much as I love Jeremy McGrath, I love you, McGrath, you're awesome. The fact that him and The Rock and these guys ragged on this bike, I think makes it sound like it's worse than it is. I mean, it won Motocross Action shootout there in 96. I thought the bike was great. It had a similar power band to the Hondas of the time in that it had a nice wide pull. It just didn't have as much. Now, at my speed, at this point, I'm riding 250B. It was fine. I wasn't an expert. I'm not a guy who's going to pin it to the stops and, wring the hell out of it. I just needed it to pull my butt around and help me get over jumps, and it did that just fine. I thought it was actually very powerful. I thought it was fine. Snappy power, great suspension. great looks. I just thought it was an excellent motorcycle. I never had any reliability issues with it too. I only had it about a year, so I know a lot of people had problems with, like, I think the wheels and some transmission issues, but I never experienced that. Like I said, it was almost brand new when I got it, and I never had any problems. So in general, my experience with Suzuki's has been kind of so-so in terms of reliability, but I had no problem. Neither one of these 96 RMs gave me any trouble. I love the bike. It was a good machine for sure. Next up, the 1996 Honda CR250R. After I had the 96 RM250, I actually ended up getting out of motocross for maybe, I don't know, half a year or so, for a little bit. My buddies and I joke about it as the dark days. We got into mountain biking. I bought a Cannondale Super V, and we were like all into the mountain biking thing for a month or so, until a buddy of mine, a couple of months, I mean, a buddy of mine, we were out mountain biking, and he comes along, my buddy Eric Beha comes along with his CR125, and I was like, you know what? I feel like a loser on this bicycle. So I was like, you know what? Screw this. We kept our bikes, but we decided we want to get some dirt bikes again. So I ended up picking up a pre-owned 1996 CR250 from my buddy Greg Vole at Loud Motorsports, the same dealership I'd bought the Fat Cat from many years prior. It was a really cool bike. I like this thing quite a lot. It actually, like I said, it reminds me a lot of that 96 RM250. They're more similar than they are different, I think, in terms of the way they felt and the ergonomics. I think it's pretty clear when Suzuki and DeCoster made this 96 RM, they were patterning it after Honda. The Hondas were the best bikes at the time, and it had a very Honda-esque feel. The CR didn't have as good a suspension. Like I said, that RM with those right side up forks was phenomenal. So the CR suspension was a little less awesome, but really good motorcycle overall. My one beef with it was didn't have great low end. I think my 90 actually had more low end. The 92 and newer bikes, they kind of changed the way they ran a little bit. They had a lot more hit and pulled stronger on top, but they maybe weren't as electric and smooth as the earlier ones. So for me personally, I was riding some on the track, some on the trails. Like I said, my personal track was in the woods there. My buddy Connor and all of us, we had laid out this kind of motocross track in the woods. Real tight, fun little area, but like I said, very tight. And I needed a bike that had a little more grunt, so I ended up putting a gnarly FMF gnarly pipe on it, and that really kind of perked up the grunt on the bike and really brought it back to where I wanted it. With that pipe on there, it ran much more like the 95 YZ or whatever. It had, a good roll-on power, excellent mid-range torque, just a phenomenal motorcycle. I remember another buddy of mine bought the new 1999 CR250, and he brought it over to my house. And actually Joe Bartlett, one of the Bartlett brothers, we were riding around there, and we swapped bikes, and he was like, man, he loved the 96. It was so much better. And I got on that 99. I was like, this thing is a pile of crap. The suspension was, it just felt harsh because the damn frame was so stiff. I think the motor too, they made some changes in the 99. I felt like the motor was much narrower. The power band was much narrower. Even though in general, those engines are thought to be pretty good for 98 or 99. One of those years in there, they kind of screwed them up a little bit. And this 99 I didn't really like. So this 96 was a great motorcycle, phenomenal machine. And there's a good reason why so many people restore them now. It's not just McGrath. They're a great platform, a good handling bike, and probably one of the last best CR250s. Next up, the 2001 Yamaha YZ250F. After a little while with the CR250, I got the really idiotic idea to go back to a 125. Actually, the 125 probably wasn't the problem. The bike I chose was the problem. I ended up getting a 1999 CR125. Long story, I originally wanted to get a YZ125. If you know that, in my other video, I mentioned that. I went to go get it. They're sold out. So I ended up getting a CR125, brand new, again from my buddy at Loud Motorsports here in Leesburg. This is another bike I did not care for. So another friend of mine had a YZ400F when that thing first came out. And I was riding over at my buddy Greg Harrison's place. And I tried out the YZ400F, and I was like, you know what? This is exactly what I'm looking for. I hate this CR125. It's a turd. It vibrates. It has gutless POS. Hated it. So I said, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to sell the CR125. Took a beating on that one. I bought it brand new. So that you can tell, selling it about 6 months after I bought it, what you imagine what I lost. I don't even remember now, but I'm sure it's probably $2,000 or something insane. So I ended up getting a YZ400F. Had that for a while. Loved that bike. I'll cover that in another video. But the next 250 I got, though, was the first 2001 YZ250F. I still remember the day I'm sitting at my computer at work, and I saw, maybe on Moto News back then, or one of those sites that's not around, maybe Mikey P's Fresh Dirt, I don't know, but they were talking about the all-new 250 version of the YZ400F, and that like blew my mind, because you gotta remember at the time, 250 4-strokes were not the kind of thing you would motocross race. I mean, I'd ridden a lot of XR250s over the years. I had an XR200 at one point, and they were fun bikes. Good time. They were great fun. Got no problem with 4-strokes. Love XRs, but they weren't race bikes. And the thought of a 250 4-stroke was like super intriguing, because I like the 125 experience, like holding it wide open, the lighter feel and stuff. But I just, maybe wasn't getting to the point where I was as comfortable riding the demanding power band it required. So the 250F seemed like an intriguing thing. So I called all of my local buddies who had shops, ended up finding one at, they had on order, the first one they had coming at Cycle Sport, I guess, in Herndon here in Virginia. And I said, I put a deposit on it, and it came in maybe 2 months later. So I got the first one they got, and this bike was just mind-blowing to me at the time. The only thing that kind of sucked was I got it, I think it was like February. So I went out taking it out riding, and the ground was frozen. It was a little sketchy at first, but I couldn't believe how quickly it revved. I mean, all the bikes are like this now, but if you grew up riding 2-strokes and XRs and things, these first generation of these Yamaha 4-strokes were just like mind-blowing. I just couldn't believe it. Revved to the moon, and I couldn't believe how torquey it was. Compared to 125, it was like no contest. The thing was, there's no way this bike should have been fair to race against the 125s. That was, the AMA just screwed us all with this asinine decision, because this bike would just romp all over it. Now, in terms of outright, like if you look at the power curve, peak power, maybe not, but everywhere else but that like 500 RPM where the 125 had it, it killed it. This bike handled great. It felt much lighter. The YZ400F, I loved it, but it was a very heavy bike, and you felt it. It felt like an XR. It felt, it had this great, super easy revving engine, nice handling, but felt like a tank. And this 250F didn't feel like that at all. It had about the same, I think it was about the same weight as a 250 at the time. Not as light as a modern KTM, but for the time, very, very light. My real only beef with this thing was the friggin' starting. Back then, the Yamahas had a starting drill. You had to find top dead center. You had to click over the compression release just to go just past, and you had to let it go all the way to the top, and then you had to give it a good strong kick. Now, that doesn't sound like too hard, but it was actually really tricky, because you had to spin it at just the right RPMs. It was actually way harder than on the 400. The 400 had the same drill, but it seemed to be a lot easier. This 250 was persnickety, and my problem with it was sometimes it just would refuse to start. I mean, it literally would not start. I would have to, the only way to get it for me to start was to put an all-new plug in it. So I would have to, and it wasn't easy. Unlike a 2-stroke where you just get a wrench and take it off, you had to take the tank loose, and it was, the cylinder was like way jammed up in there. It wasn't easy to get to. It did this to me on half a dozen occasions where the frickin' thing would not start. And heaven help you if you accidentally whack the throttle like you would on a 2-stroke, or your jerk buddy would come up and give it a couple of squirts just to screw with you. You'd never get it started for like half an hour. So as much as I liked the performance of this bike and thought it was fun, the starting thing made me start to hate it. And basically what happened was, one day we were going to go riding with my buddies. I went out to start it. The son of a bitch refused to start. And you know what? I had enough. I was like, screw it. You're out of here. And I ended up taking it to Loud Motorsports, traded it in on the all-new 2002 CRF250, and I never looked back. The 2004 Honda CRF250R. I had that CRF450 for about a year or so, maybe almost 2. I really liked the bike. It was a really good bike. The thing about the CRF had no starting drill. First kick, second kick, boom, easy. Awesome. Loved that part of it. What got me again was, the new bike bug. When Honda came out with an all-new design in 2004, they came out with their version of the YZ250F, the 2004 CRF250R. That thing looked so cool. It had all-new bodywork, subtly different than the O2, made the O2 look kind of cobby compared to it. And the main thing was, it was the 250F, which I actually did prefer riding the smaller bike. And it had no starting drill. It had none of the other nonsense the Yamaha had with it. I thought it would be like the perfect kind of compromise bike. So I ended up taking my bike down to Loudon, trading in the 450R on the all-new CRF250R. So I got an all-new 04. This bike, though, amazingly, I never felt comfortable on it. Something about the way it ran. Again, the Yamaha was very much kind of like my 1990 CR250 in that it didn't care what gear you're in. You just pinned it and the power was there at just this long linear flow of power. The farther you revved it, the farther it pulled. That CRF, though, it had a more narrow kind of a mid-range only motor. It was another one of those bikes that I always felt like I was in the wrong gear, kind of like that 96 RM125. I just never came to grips with it. Well, the funny thing is, if you look at the bikes, that's the one motorcycle I never got graphics for. I never got accessories for. I never bought a pipe for it. I didn't do shit. I barely rode the thing. For some reason, I just never connected with this motorcycle. And then I started hearing these rumors about pistons breaking and all these other problems they were having with this first generation CRF. It didn't have the combined oil like the YZ250F had. It had like a very small little oil tank. It kept the tranny and the engine oil separate, which was a great idea in theory, but this bike would use oil and you had to be like really diligent about it. And if you weren't careful, you could run it out of oil and cause some serious problems. They also had, I think, valve issues. Anyway, I didn't have it long enough to have any of these problems. Mine mechanically did not have any of these issues because I really barely rode it. It's one of those bikes that should have been great. I didn't connect with it, and ended up ditching it after maybe about a year. Our next 250 is the 2006 Kawasaki KX250. After I'd had enough of the 04 CRF250, I ended up ditching that and getting a 05 CRF450, one of my all-time favorite bikes. Love that machine. But it was really a massive handful in the woods. The thing was a powerhouse and just an absolute rocket ship. Really kind of too fast for me, quite frankly. It was a bike that didn't need any motor mods. I mean, Jesus, you could probably win a Supercross with a stock motor. The Honda really killed it with that design. So I wanted something to ride in the woods. Again, I kind of split 50-50 between track riding and then trail riding. I have a great network of trails up at my parents' place even to this day. We got there and ride. Little motocross track and all kinds of like a really kind of a hare scrambles loop all over the mountain. So I wanted something to ride that kind of thing with. And I had an 05 KTM 200 and I had gotten rid of that. And I decided I want something a little more like a two-stroke because I always felt that they were a little more at home in the woodsy environment. So I ended up picking up a used 2006 KX250. This was a really cool bike. I liked the looks of it. I ended up getting the Chevy Trucks graphics and the flow plastic for it and making it look really awesome. This thing was a rocket. It was really fast. The thing just hit like a ton of bricks. I remember at the time I also had a CR500, a 1990 CR500. And so at the time I had a 450 four-stroke CR, a CR500, and then this KX250. And I remember riding the KX250 back-to-back with that 500, and it didn't feel like a whole lot slower. I was like, damn, this thing is fast. But what I didn't like about it was the handling was weird. It had just a strange feel. I had not had a whole lot of Kawasaki's over the years. I'd had that 87, then I guess the 89. So I don't have a lot of experience with the mid-90s ones. I always wanted one. Wanted a 94. I couldn't afford it back then. But it just had a strange feel. The front end felt like the ass was up in the air and the front was down, kind of that stink bug thing they talk about a lot of times. And it just felt a little sketchy. Again, it didn't feel planted. My other problem with it, too, is the clutch was just terrible in this thing. It was like a light switch, on and off, grabby as hell, which is not what you want in the woods where you're going to be, feathering it a lot, kind of, because it's not I didn't put a heavier weight flywheel on it or anything. I was just kind of riding it as a motocross bike in the woods. And the clutch was crappy. I ended up buying a Magura hydraulic clutch. That definitely helped because the pull was pretty heavy, too. But overall, I just didn't really like this motorcycle. I had it about a year, and it was fine for what I was doing with it. That was another bike, too. I had to run the race gas mixed in, or it would ping like a son of a bitch. So, not a great motorcycle in a lot of ways. It's a neat-looking motorcycle. I like the looks of them in general, but certainly not the best machine of its era, I don't think. Next up is another four-stroke, the 2007 Suzuki RM250. My next 250 was a four-stroke. Funny story, I actually sell cars for a living. I'm a general sales manager at a car dealership in Virginia. I sell Buicks and GMCs. If you need a truck, give me a call. But I was thinking in 2007 era about transitioning into the motorcycle business. A buddy of mine was looking for a GM. My buddy Greg at Loud Motorsports. He was looking for a GM for his store, and he actually offered me a 2007 Suzuki RMZ250 as a signing bonus. So if I decided to go work for him, he'd give me this new RMZ as a signing bonus. So seemed like a pretty good deal. I wanted to make a change anyway at the time, so I went ahead and did that. This bike, I liked it a lot. In some ways, other ways it was kind of eh. The first time I rode it, we actually went through a little water crossing with the damn thing, and it ended up somehow sucking water into the airbox and developed a knock. At first I thought it was a rod knock. I'd ridden it all of like 1 hour, and it started making a knock. And so I remember going, my buddy Jamie was like, "Does that sound normal to you? What does that sound?" Long story short, it turned out to be it had got a little water in the oil, and it had thinned the oil out enough in just that 1 little minute to cause the piston to go out around a little bit, and it was rocking. If you ever seen one of these pistons in a modern four-stroke, there's no skirt to it, so it doesn't take much to get that rocking thing going, and that was what I was hearing. So I ended up having to get an all-new cylinder and piston. I had to have the whole thing completely rebuilt after an hour riding, and I have ridden in water my entire life. I've taken almost every motorcycle I ever had, because like right next to my right next to my parents' place, there's like a creek. We'd go down there and ride through it. I've submerged bikes. I have never had a problem. I go through this friggin' little creek crossing with this brand new RMZ, and it completely, jacks the motor up. So needless to say, I was not a happy camper with Suzuki at this point. Once I got the bike rebuilt, the motor was okay. This was the first year for the Suzuki 250. The previous version had been like the Kawasaki version. I love the way it handled. I felt really fast on this bike. I mean, this bike, I felt like I could put it anywhere. The handling was probably the best of any motorcycle I've ever owned. It was just a phenomenal, it felt like an 80 almost. You could just toss it around, and the power, though, was not spectacular. I was probably running, I don't know, I was probably a $180, $190 at this point. A little heavy for a 250F, but it was kind of struggling with my weight on it. If you try to pull a tall gear, it would bog. It didn't have an excess of power, probably like the current one too. That was not the Suzuki's forte. The forte was the suspension was very good. I had to put stiffer forks in it. The stock suspension was a little soft with my weight on it, but once I put stiffer springs front and rear, the bike was awesome. Handled excellently. It just was always having little problems. I kept getting flats in it, and it's hard to say that's clearly not Suzuki's problem, but I've never had a problem with flats other than this motorcycle. I must have went through 3 or 4 tubes. I don't know whether there was I took it to the bike shop and said, "Look, you changed the damn tire. Something going on here." They didn't find anything, didn't see anything poking through. I don't know what was going on. I just kept having problems. So I had it maybe a year. I got aggravated with it. It was, after a while, it just felt like the thing was jinxed, and I I let it go because, maybe unfairly or whatever, I just had a sour taste in my mouth about the whole experience. Next up, the 2006 Suzuki RM250 Carmichael Edition. Now, while I had this RMZ 250, I actually ended up picking up another 250 two-stroke at the same time. I came across a Ricky Carmichael Edition 2006 RM250 in like the local Cycle Trader or something. I don't think it was on eBay, although it could have been at this point, but I'm pretty sure it was a local paper. I happened to stumble across it and said, "Holy crap, love this bike." I remember looking at it on the showroom floor, had the gold rims and all the whole thing, and I thought the bike was badass looking. Really my favorite Suzuki design of all time, that look. I love that beautiful Makita graphics, the whole thing. Just a great looking machine. So I said, you know what? I've always wanted one of these. Let's go look at it. I made the mistake of going to look at the bike in at night. The guy had it in a barn. Now, he told me the bike was super clean, low hours. I barely ridden it and all yada, yada, yada. And we went there. It was raining. It was dark. It was in a barn. And I got totally snookered. I bought the motorcycle. And as soon as I took it back to my house and we saw it in like bright light in the garage, we're like, this thing is beat. The bike was only a year old at this point, and it was worn out like it was 20 years old. All the roller bearings were worn out. Everything, the guy just trashed it. And I was super not pleased with this, but caveat emptor, buyer beware. It's not like I bought it from a dealership. I couldn't take it back, so I was like, oh, well, I got it now, whatever. So I ended up having to completely replace everything on this bike. It looked great. I did love the looks of it. The Makita graphics were awesome. I ended up scoring another set of those off of eBay, I guess, and replaced those original graphics. Were getting kind of beat. I kept it basically. I didn't put my own numbers on or anything. I never raced this particular one. I had it just kind of as a play toy. I never felt comfortable on it. This bike was really frantic. This was the first RM I had, like RM250 since my 96, and the bike had a super sharp turning. It ended up putting me on my head a couple times. I'd go in and it would like oversteer. I'd go in the front end of a knife and it'd oversteer. It just was very, very busy feeling, kind of the RM thing. I know a lot of people love it. It's probably great for Supercross, but I was riding on big outdoor tracks and the bike just felt kind of sketch at speed. It also had a really hard hit. The engine was really, really explosive. Again, great for Supercross, great for getting up and over jumps. I thought it was a little hard to get off that RMZ250, which had this really smooth linear power, to this like hyperactive YZ or RM250. So my feeling on this bike was it was probably great if you're a pro or an expert. For me at this point, a middle age, I don't know, 35 or 36 at this time. It was a little bit more than I was looking for. I love to look at it in the garage, but actually riding it, it was a little bit of a handful. So I ended up mostly looking at it and ended up riding the RMZ most of the time and let that one sit. Next up, one of my favorites, the 2005 Yamaha YZ250. After the 2006 RM250, the next 250 motocross machine I owned was a 2005 YZ250. Now, even though it was a year older, my buddy Greg it's actually a repo bike. This dude had brought it in for repairs and never paid him. It had been in his shop for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. Maybe at this point, this is maybe, I don't know, 12, 13 or whatever. Bike was, pretty 6 or 7 years old then, but it was really clean. It had been sitting back in the shop gathering dust. And I went in there one day and said, what's the deal with that bike? Would you be willing to part with it? So I think I bought it for like $2,000. And the bike was actually very clean. It was actually owned by a former Redskins player, believe it or not. And the only problem was he had put, I don't know what the hell springs he'd put in it, but they were made like for James Stewart. The forks did not friggin' move. It was crazy how stiff the suspension was. So, even with my lard ass on it, it felt like they didn't move. I was like, holy Christ, this guy must have been 300 pounds on this bike. So he had stiff Greg. I bought it. Great engine. I like this of the 06 KX, the 06 RM, and this Yamaha. I like the Yamaha by far the best. This was a great motorcycle. Love the layout, love the handling. Really, it's the same bike you can buy right now. Phenomenal engine. This was the first year for the aluminum frame. Like I said, the suspension, I never got it revalved. I really should have sent it off to Race Tech and got them to fix it, get it set up for me. I fiddled with the dials to where you kind of live with it. But anybody who rode it was like, God dang, the forks don't work. I was like, yeah, I know, they're terrible. So I used it mainly for a trail bike. Like I said, I had it for riding in the woods. So it wasn't too bad. Just softened up as much as I could and kind of live with it. If I hadn't been so heavy, it probably would have been unrideable. But the fact that I was pretty heavy myself, it made it at least livable. But it was never great. I would like, if it had been an 06 with the SSS forks, probably would have been a lot better. This was the last year of the older style. And great motorcycle and needed some suspension work. Pretty much the reason I ended up selling this one was I cartwheeled the damn thing. Hit right at my parents' place. Hit this, what was a stump, a tree had got pulled up, and in the woods, I didn't see the hole there. Hit the front end, went over the bars, jacked my knee all to hell. I'd already had 2 knee surgeries at this point, so I had to get another 3rd knee surgery. I ended up selling the damn motorcycle to pay for the knee surgery because it was going to cost me a couple grand after the deductible and everything. So that was a sad way to end things with that motorcycle. I loved it. It was funny. It's one of those days where you're on fire. You feel so great. I remember the day I crashed. I was like, oh man, I'm on it. I'm just booking through the woods, and then I'm sitting there wondering whether I can get up and kick the damn thing to get back to the truck. So I'm sure we've all done that, where you have that, let's go one more lap, and it didn't work out for me that day, and it was a sad end to a great motorcycle. My next motocross machine was my 1990 CR250R project bike. After jacking up my knee, I decided I had had enough of dirt bike riding for a while. I took probably about 3 years off. I had just said I had so many injuries. Like all of us, I've had many surgeries, many concussions, many broken, busted everything. So I was getting up there. I was in my mid-40s. I was like, screw this. I am too old for this crap. So I took a couple years off, but then I got the kind of the itch a little bit, and I decided in 2015 I wanted to find a bike to do a restoration on. I thought it was something I could do for Pulp MX, write about it, do a little video. You can actually find the video of this bike on this channel as well. I did a whole kind of a vlog of my restoration. So Nick McCabe, one of the guys who writes for Racer X, he had had a 1990 CR250. He has quite a collection of bikes he was willing to part with. Clean bike, just old, unrestored. Seemed like it was in pretty good shape overall. ended up buying it from him, having it shipped out here from California. Overall, the bike had a weird little glitch where it would run on and stuff. It turned out it was the carburetor was the problem. It took me quite a while to figure that out. You can read the article on Pulp MX about it. Like I said, I chronicled the whole thing, but the bike itself I tore it all the way down to the bare wheels, had the frame fixed. The frame was actually worn out on the bottom. The guy had it out in the dunes, and I guess it wasn't like flattened and crashed. It looked like it had been sandblasted and worn through the frame, which is pretty crazy. I guess he never ran a skid plate. The bike, though, was overall mechanically sound. I had to get, some new wheels. The same thing my old 90 had done. The wheels were all cracked. And I was familiar with the machine. Like I said, I knew what was going to break on these old things. And the same old stuff. Overall, I think the project turned out great. The bike was beautiful. Loved it. It was fun to ride. I had Race Tech do the suspension. Huge improvement. I wish I'd had the money to have them do it way back in 1990. Although I'm sure the technology's gotten better since then. So overall, an excellent machine, a fun project I really enjoyed. My last 250, the 2016 KTM 250 SXF. Riding my project bike around gave me the itch a little bit again. So in 2016, I decided, hey, I wanted to get something a little more modern to ride. So I ended up picking up a 2016 KTM 250 SXF. This was a bike. I debated what I wanted to get. Originally, I was looking at, my buddy Greg had some really great deals on the KX250F, and I looked at a Yamaha YZ250F. I talked to Chris Kiefer. He recommended I get the Yamaha. The power band of the Yamaha is excellent. I would like to have had that, but I really wanted something with electric start, and back then they didn't have it on the Yamaha. Really, I think the KTM was the only one that had it then. Love the looks of the KTM. I just thought it was a trick machine, and so I ended up going with that. The bike itself, I liked it quite a bit. The power band was kind of weird in that it revved to the moon. Like, I remember when I first got on that 01 YZ250, I'd never experienced anything like that before, with the high revving. Holy crap, just pulled and pulled. And it was the same kind of experience I had on that KTM, though it was even more so. The thing, basically, you'd rev it to the point you think you should shut off, and then you got to keep it on a little bit longer, and then it would keep pulling. So it was a little tricky to ride in that respect, in that it didn't have a lot of grunt. It was really... So if you're going to go fast on it, which I wasn't going to do that. I was just got it to kind of play on. It was fun, though. If you could just wring the crap out of it, it was a lot of fun. The thing just pulled and pulled. Good motorcycle. Love the electric start. I thought the suspension was pretty decent. I ended up having Race Tech redo it for me, just kind of as a project for Pulp MX. I did an article on it just to see what they could do with it. I was real happy with the results. I think I could have ridden it stock. It was fine. At my speed, it wasn't going to matter. I actually thought the 1990 CR250 had better suspension after Race Tech got done with it, which is what prompted me to get them to do it. I was like, they just did a good job with that. I was real happy with that part of it. The brakes work great. KTM's, the only thing that kind of sketched me out was a couple times on it head shake pretty violently, which surprised me. Most of the newer bikes I had not done that in quite a while. And this thing, every now and again, would do that same shit my old, CRs would do in the old days. It ripped the handlebars out of my hand one time, and I was like, dude, I'm getting too old for this. Saw my life flash in front of me. And I enjoyed the bike, though. It was pretty good. In the end, I got rid of it because my health, basically. I have my right hip is just jacked up from years of getting the crap pounded out of it, and I need to have my hip replaced. And it got to the point where I ride for a couple hours, then I couldn't walk for like 3 days. I'd be hobbling around like I was 90. So it kind of took the fun out of it. I couldn't really get the most out of the motorcycle. So that, at this point, was like the last motorcycle I've owned. I ended up selling it, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. I had it about a year, so I guess 2017 or 2018. I don't remember exactly, but it was a great motorcycle. I didn't get rid of it because of the bike. I got rid of it because I physically just couldn't do it anymore. So there you have it. That's a look back at all the 250 motocross machines I've owned. I've had quite a few of them. Really, really great machines. Some of them really not great machines. Others, some that were probably great and they just didn't jive with me. I'd love to know what everybody else's experience has been with some of these machines. I've been lucky to have a lot of motorcycles and kind of try them all out, get a chance to experience a lot of the great machines. And then these are just bikes I've owned. Between myself and my buddy Jamie Connor, he had like a 92 YZ250, and I mean, I could list all. He's probably had almost as many mics as I have. And so I have ridden literally hundreds of different motorcycles over the last 40 years. And some of the ones, like I said, were great, some were not. So if you want to check out the 125 video I did, it posted last week. That'll be on the channel as well, where I went down those. I'm going to do one on the open class bikes I've had as well, getting a little detail on those. If you like these, let me know. Maybe I'll do one on the off-road bikes I could do one on ATVs and off-road. Like I said, I've had a lot of different motorcycles, and it's kind of fun to look back on them and see what everybody thinks. I got pretty good feedback on the 125 one, so if you like this one as well, I'll keep going with them. If you want to help out the channel, I have Motocross Vault merch available in my Teespring. The link is in the description below. If you could subscribe to the channel, I'd appreciate it. Share it on social media. Give it a thumbs up. That helps the algorithm, helps people find the channel. I do appreciate that great deal. If you're listening to this on my podcast, if you could give us a like and a thumbs up and a rating on Apple Podcasts, that'd be very much appreciated as well. So again, until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer. Keep the rubber side down.